Good afternoon. We Teach Well welcomes you to this discussion, part of the Victorian Government's Digital Innovation Futures Festival for 2023. Whether you're watching this now or later on demand, we are thrilled that you have tuned in. But before we begin, We Teach Well acknowledges the sovereignty of the traditional custodians of the land where we live and work. We pay our respects to their elders, both past and present. We recognise that sovereignty was never ceded and that the land is and always will be Aboriginal land. As an education business, We Teach Well recognises the value of traditional Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander education systems and promotes increased Aboriginal involvement in education at state and federal level. So, technology offers us great opportunities to reduce educational inequality on a global scale, but if not well used, it can have the opposite effect. At We Teach Well, I am very committed to the idea of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. They're really important guides, and I think they are really helpful. Goal 4 aims to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. Furthermore, Article 28 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, signed in November 1989, states that education is the right of every child. It should be free and fair with equal access for girls and boys. So how do we ensure that the way we apply technology furthers those goals? To discuss this, we have three very experienced educators who are working with different groups of students, different demographics, for whom technology can help make the experience of learning much, much better. Anam Javed is the master teacher in residence for technologies at the Victorian Academy of Teaching and Leadership. Anam is an experienced educator in the maths and science field who has actively worked to boost the number of women in STEM leadership. She sees STEM as being particularly the technologies, the most useful and contextually appropriate avenue for achieving equitable education outcomes for children from socioeconomically and culturally diverse backgrounds. Dr. Matthew Harrison, Senior Lecturer, Researcher in Education at University of Melbourne. So Matthew is now the Director of Professional and Continuing Education, PACE, at the University of Melbourne Graduate School of Education. And I think I've heard that that's not what we call it now. And was recently awarded the Gem Scott Teaching Fellowship to lead a team of developing resources for neurodivergent teachers and students. He has a keen passion for utilising technology to enhance belonging and inclusion in education. And if he can make the learning games-based, so much the better. Gianna Lucas. Gianna is the co-founder and CEO of Happow, a gamified e-learning life skills platform to help young people not just survive, but thrive in high school and beyond. Happow's mission is to future-proof the lives of young people, and their vision is to educate, entertain, and empower 10 million young people globally by 2030 through their life skills, education, and media network. So, three very valuable voices in what is a complex issue. People talk about the digital divide. We talk about, look, I might be wrong, Matthew, and you can speak to this. So I found out at a very late age that I was insanely diverse. Wonderful. But nobody talked about it. you know, as teachers or as students, nobody talked about that. And when I look back on my teaching career, and my students used to tell me I had ADHD, they thought that was fairly obvious, but we didn't talk about that. So this fellowship that you've got, there must be a lot of teachers out there saying, oh my goodness, what is your feeling in that? Can you?
Look, I think our understanding of neurodiversity has improved so much. And I'm sure our other panelists have some really great knowledge around this as well. I am so fortunate that I have a wonderful team of neurodivergent people that I get to work with every day, and my students at the University of Melbourne and my staff. And so this is really the idea of having a neurodiversity project that goes right across the universities. It's a team effort. So I'm talking about people like Jess Rawlings, our wonderful CEO at Next Level Collaboration, people like Jess Reardon, Dr. Jess Reardon, Dr. Sarah Timperley. And what's really interesting, Carolyn, is that a lot of the people identify as female, and they weren't diagnosed as being neurodivergent until they're in their 20s.
I
And
wasn't diagnosed until I was 58.
yeah, it's so interesting. And the real impetus for this body of work came from it, like a lot of great things, came from a small study we did here. We're now calling it the Faculty of Education. So I need to upgrade my background.
I need to upgrade my information.
It will never, ever in my brain. I've had 8 years of working here, so I think it will take me a long time to change those old habits. But we did some research at the Faculty of Education, and there were people who I've known for 7 or 8 years who came to my office. These were senior professors who said, I've never told anyone, but I'm actually neurodivergent and I want to be part of this study, looking at lived experiences of neurodivergent students at the university and staff members, professional and academic. And that really got us thinking, saying, geez, there's this big wave of people. So clinically, and I do have some issues with some of the clinical diagnosis processes, but we see it's 4-to-1 for autism, for example. We know it should be 50-50 along. If we're using a binary view of gender rather than the spectrum, we should say there should be equal, but we know that currently it's 4 people who identify as male to every female being picked up. I believe, and I believe the evidence points to the fact we're missing. That means we're missing 3 out of 4 people who identify as female or non-binary there. So it's a really interesting space we're in right now. That's starting to be recognized. We've got some wonderful female or non-binary leaders here at the university who are people like yourself, Carolyn, raising the profile and saying it's nothing to be ashamed of, something to be celebrated. And it's another type of diversity we need to find a way to make sure that we are meeting those needs. So that's where the project came from.
Cool. When we're finished here on another thing, I've got a story about that I think will be of interest to you.
Yeah, thank you. I'd love to hear.
Yeah. So technology. How does technology in your understanding help us to reach or to work with neurodiverse learners?
I'm going to try to capture this in a tweak, so I really want to hear from the other panelists too. So I'll keep this short. I'm going to keep it to the old 140 characters. Social connection, in an essence, it's a vehicle for finding other people like yourself that you never knew that were out there.
Yeah.
In a way of feeling like, yes, you belong here. Other people are having the same experience as you are, and you are not alone.
Yeah. That is an incredibly powerful thing to bring to the table. And I think it's probably why I've learned to love it so much.
Me too.
Anam, you, from what I can read, what I've heard you speak about, are very concerned with educational equality and how learners from socioeconomically and culturally different, socioeconomically not as well off and culturally different, can be disadvantaged in our education system. I think all of us who have been in a classroom know that high school is not necessarily a safe space for a lot of our people, a lot of our students. How do
Yes. Yeah, thank you for that, Carolyn. I think it's really important to recognize that despite a lot of great efforts that are happening across the state and, of course, at a government level, the experience that a lot of school students have is very heavily dependent in many cases on what postcode they come from and hence, what school they've been allocated, especially with, the very strict zoning policy that's come into place for government schools. I think that for a child and their family to be limited by, where they've chosen to build their home, which very often is in culturally and linguistically diverse areas too, is not equitable. And so, I can speak to my case where when and my husband and I were starting a family, we moved away from our cultural hub. We decided to move away because we knew that, the level of schooling that our unborn child would experience perhaps would not be at par or to the level that we would like it to be. And that was a very difficult decision because when you leave an area where, there's language, culture, food, similar faces at the park, and so uproot yourself to be somewhere else just based on that, it can have a very different levels of impact. I think technology has a huge role to play in that, and we're on the right track because we've got 18 tech schools coming up across the state of Victoria, the bulk of them in regional locations, and providing free access to technology like drones, coding, gamification, and microcontrollers like Arduino and Microbit. That said, even just getting the word out to schools that are struggling with staff absences, high turnover rates, severe behavioral issues, it's very hard to get students on a bus where if there's no teachers on site and if you've got casual relief teachers staffing classrooms. So there's a lot technology can do, and obviously the internet has a huge role to play, but I guess there needs to be recognition that with the advent of ChatGPT since November last year, that's actually furthering inequity at this point because we've got schools that are high SES, and SES shouldn't be using abbreviation, so it's socioeconomic status. They've got a huge head start. They're using ChatGPT for research, admin, creating excellent prompts for students, extending them, debate, podcasting generation, choose your own adventure style learning. They're getting the best experts into their schools to talk about these things and upskill staff. And there's schools on the other end of the spectrum who have not even scratched the surface when it comes to using artificial intelligence, and hence the gap, unfortunately, is getting bigger. So that's sort of me painting a picture in response to your question about what we're dealing with and the context.
I don't know if you noticed, I finally got up to posting it today, but we are putting forward an action research project through DIF this year to get teachers to commit for 12 months of using AI in their work and feeding back the information so that we actually have a body of, if the problem is we don't know how it's working, well, here we are. We've worked with it this way and then bring the results in next year. Because, the private schools are using it. They're using it in Catholic schools are using it. It appears that most of the schools where it's banned are government schools.
They're not banned it's not banned anymore, Carolyn. So government schools all have access to ChatGPT as of 3 to 4 months ago.
Okay, it's still banned in Queensland.
Good to know.
So, yeah. Gianna, one of the things that interests me so much about Happow, and it just came to me, when we talk about wellness or life skills and these sort of learning for teenagers, we often see it as a standalone thing that's separate from their normal learning, the normal thing to do at school. It's something else. But it struck me that actually doing it at the same time, merging those two experiences, is actually probably much more helpful and much more realistic. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it absolutely is. I love what you said, because I think integrating life skills development into the school system rather than having it as an add-on is so important to think about. The reason why we actually started Happow in the first place, well, one of the reasons was because a school might have to tick a box or meet a certain area of curriculum around relationship development or whatever it might be. They get an external facilitator into that school. They do a wonderful job at supporting the students, educating the students on that particular topic. And then they go away and they might go to another school. And then throughout that school year, what type of, I guess, conversation is continuing to be had when it's not actually on that particular designated personal development day for a particular year level or cohort. And so Happow fills in that gap to be able to be that support for young people, so it can be easily integrated with our e-learning platform, as well as our in-person elements if a school chooses to use that as well, to be able to have a holistic approach to learning. So it's integrated into other subjects that they learn at school, because ultimately by learning key life skills like money management, career, we cover relationships, a whole spectrum of ideas. It actually empowers a young person because they feel more confident in who they are, potentially what they want to do. They are more inclined to apply for a job as well that they might enjoy alongside school. And then they're more committed to the classroom because they're feeling seen and heard. I had a conversation just the other day whilst I was shopping with a young adult who's just finished high school a year ago. And she asked me, "Oh, what do you do for a living?" And I told her. And she said, "I wish I had your platform at school." She says, "I felt like school, I couldn't quite fit into the mold of the classroom." She said, "I wanted to learn things that would actually help me once I turn 18 and I'm independent and out of home." And she said, "I wish I learned that. I would have stayed in school longer and enjoyed it more." And it was really interesting to hear that feedback. And it's something that I hear so often. If I had $1 for, every time I heard that, I'd be a very wealthy woman, I think.
Yeah, my thought was somewhat less helpful. My thought went straight to the idea of deadlines. If I had known that when they said this is a deadline, you've got to hand in your assessment, that actually the rest of your life, people are going to give you deadlines.
Yeah.
Yeah. But having the real life separated from school life, those learnings didn't happen. And it's not surprising that mine was about deadlines.
Well, it's interesting you say that about deadlines as well, because a lot of the things that we've found is young people, though they might enjoy a particular subject, may not be able to study in a way that suits them and their mind and their ability or whatever it might be. And they're told to study a particular way, which is not a one-size-fits-all approach. Everyone's unique. Personalized learning is so important. And so we actually developed on our platform a study skills essential life skills course. So a young person can learn, all right, what is going to empower me most, so I feel like I can learn, so I can meet deadlines, I can turn up to an exam and feel a little bit more confident than what I would have been prior to not knowing these skills.
Okay, Anam, Matt and Gianna, what technologies do you think are going to help the most? What do we need? What do we need? Do we need money put into our schools and our systems? Do we need new types of technology, or do we need technology that's more reliable? Do we need more people in schools in the IT department so that there's not only 2 people managing the technology for a 900 student school.
I want to hear more about Happow, but later on. That's all right. But
It's good.
No, I'm very interested. I don't know, Anam and Gianna, please feel free to jump in at any time. And yeah, I don't know what your experiences are, but I found as a teacher and as a university, working within the university sector as well, that social connection piece, the idea of having this idea of gaming groups at lunchtimes, that's something, and that's my area of passion and research is around that piece of social inclusion. We talk about academic inclusion. I work typically with kids with disability or neurological differences, but this could be a much broader version of inclusion and some of the issues you were talking about before, about this idea of strength and interest-based activities. And recently there was a conversation in New South Wales around how they were going to roll out the phone ban and look at the issues around problematic gaming. And I really wanted the group that I was working with to stop and pause and think about how are we making sure that those unstructured playtimes in our schools had opportunities for everyone to feel socially included. Because when we step back and look at the data around school refusal, the biggest blocker is that social isolation. And we're really, I think this is where technology can really help be that facilitator. And we're seeing this massive rise in esports programs and other programs that are really based around using video games, cooperative video games, competitive video games, that's culturally responsive, that is, a strength and interest of many kids who do feel very alone at school. And it's a way through which we can really create the conditions for kids who are historically marginalized to be able to make friends, to show that they have value, that they have these skills, this amazing oral language around these games. And we can use that as a starting point to make it feel like they have a community, that they belong in their schools. And I'm really interested to hear what your thoughts are, because I know the challenges around how we make sure there's an equitable rollout of esports programs has been a really big issue. I know a lot of people have been trying to solve. I don't know whether you have any advice or insights around this.
Yeah, I do, Matt. Really love that Gianna and Matt you've both touched on just embedding life skills gamification into school and bringing that to students. And so I'm going to continue very much in that vein and agree that I posit that we do have access to as much technology, Carolyn, as we need. It's actually about embedding technology into our curriculum, because that is the only way that our teachers, who have a limited amount of time and planning time and must deliver content and skills to that curriculum, can then say, actually, gamification is a key part of the curriculum, and the skills that it develops are X, Y, and Z, and they fall into the academic, social, and well-being domains. Hence, I must incorporate that into my lessons. And also leadership, school leadership can then galvanize the right strategies, connections, experts, equipment, technologies, because it's directly now linked to curriculum. We're lagging a bit behind nationally in this regard. If you compare us Australian schools to the Organisation for Economic Development, the OECD, and how other schools in comparable areas are performing in terms of technology and embedding that into schools. But I wanted Matt to give you an example of Wyndham Tech School. So Wyndham Tech School is in the deep west, as you can imagine, and it services very large schools and huge populations. As you know, Werribee is a giant city in itself now. And so schools there come from a spectrum of diversity and economic diversity as well. And Wyndham Tech School, fully funded by the government, has now built a beautiful esports room, recognizing and pitching to the government this has now become a big industry. And so there's links happening to the Department of Jobs, Skills and Industry and the Department of Education, leading to funding at this educational institution, free esports room with all the trappings needed. And now students can access that for free on a booking basis. That's
That's
a
awesome.
really great way. Yeah, that's a really great way that, students can access that, and it's there as a free resource. However, unless it is built into curriculum, teachers cannot have the time and space to say, I'm going to book out 3 hours of the morning and put my students on a bus that's free, provided by Wyndham Tech, and take them and justify that to leadership as well.
Mm.
That's my piece and my rant on that.
No, it's
The-
good.
Yeah.
It's important. We've actually been looking. I've been working with some people in California around this very issue and their curriculum, because they do have those esports centers, and looking at their equivalent of the personal social capability within the Victorian curriculum, and looking
Yeah.
at how could you map this, because I think it's such an important point.
Mapping, yeah.
Yeah.
There's two things that I'd like to just mention. First is they call them tech schools. And it sort of gives away just how old I really am, because it took me a while to cotton on that they were talking about technology schools, not tech schools. Because when I was growing up, tech schools were where you went if you wanted to be a motor mechanic or a carpenter, and they closed them all.
Yes.
So when I first heard about these big tech schools, that's what was in my mind. It took me a while to realize that that wasn't what they were at all. Catherine Newington, who two of you know, and I have for a long time believed that the digital literacy curriculum shouldn't necessarily be a separate area of the curriculum, that really it needs to be embedded in every subject. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm personally advocating for that. Obviously, having Happow being a digital platform, I think it sort of intertwines with both what Anam and Matt are saying, is getting buy-in from the teachers themselves. So, and it's obviously a curriculum issue as well, to allowing time for that. But I think you have to train the trainer. That's where my mind goes. I think about a couple of schools that I know of that really, really great schools. But if the teachers that are choosing particular programs to be brought into the school don't quite understand them, or they themselves might not be technical and they are likely to not choose that particular program or use that particular piece of technology. And so then that cohort of students might miss out on that, even though it'd be a really good resource for them to use in the classroom. So I definitely think that, coming back to your question, Carolyn, that absolutely technology, if it's embedded as part of an everyday thing, like our phones, for example, young people don't say they're online anymore. They're always online. It's a part of their world. There's no offline online. It's just one thing. So it's also changing the way we talk about technology. If it's something like a textbook that's just utilized in the classroom and these applications are embedded into the classroom, I think ultimately that would be incredible. But I have a feeling with the way things are that sorry, that's my dog, things take time. And I feel like, so sorry about that. She's agreeing with me, by the way. She's agreeing with this. But yeah, I think it takes a lot of time. And, speaking to government and allowing them to be brought into that conversation, or allowing voices like ours to be heard in larger spaces, will allow change to start to happen. But patience is key. I'm learning that as well.
It's overrated. Anam, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm actually going to pick up where Gianna left off and talk about professional learning for teachers in this regard. The need for free and accessible professional learning is very pressing, and I agree with Gianna on that. Once our teachers feel comfortable and familiar with technologies and how you can weave in interdisciplinary lenses through different technologies, like, presenting the way that you can embed coding through food technologies, through the science, through the maths, for example, how you can incorporate game design into English literature. I had a huge discussion with the teacher who's like, "What can you offer me, Anam? I'm an English literature teacher. You're a technologies teacher."
Can I have her for our research project? It's exactly the person that I need to speak to.
Yeah, and that's true, and I guess it's a valid question because we haven't had this opportunity to see technology weave through every single discipline and learning area before. So we need to create examples and exemplars, and we need to share free and easily accessible and equitable professional learning for these teachers who are already time pressed. They're already teaching to set curriculum and testing and expectations and instructional models and school implementation plans and performance and development plans. And so once you provide that and you show real examples and you showcase what interdisciplinary embedding of technology can do to a child's learning, and especially students with additional needs, that's when the magic can happen. But certainly, and as Gianna mentioned, this is a big long-term undertaking. And if you take your foot off the pedal, you can go backwards very quickly. So we need the right investment and policies in place as well.
Yeah, my major was English. I'm not tech person. I just like it a lot. And so I'm really, one of the reasons for doing the project was hearing from an old, not an old teacher, but an mature teacher about English teacher being nervous about AI. And so my thought was, if we can provide a safe space for 12 months where this teacher can practice using it in their work, they can get feedback from other people, and use it in the English classroom, because there's so many things you can do with it in English. I mean, obviously, I'm more a STEAM person than a STEM person, because I like the A in there. The other question I wanted to put to your thought, I was talking to some educators the other day who said that there was one of the systems, one of the governments, they were tertiary, they were from universities, was funding CRT time for teachers to be released to go and learn some of these technologies. But CRT time means nothing to an English teacher who has to set the lesson before they go and then still do the follow-up and all the marking after they go. It's not really a big enough space for them to do things as well as they would like to, because we tend to be a bit perfectionist. How do we manage that?
I can wear the university hat for a second here.
Please do.
I'm going to speak for the entirety of the University of Melbourne. I'm sure they'll be very happy when they watch this recording. I should be controversial, shouldn't I?
Absolutely.
We do fund the CRTs, Carolyn, and we're working with the Department of Education, providing inclusive education scholarships. It's still really hard. Even if you have got CRT time for principals are still struggling to find CRTs. Like casual relief teachers, if you're not Victorian, if you use a different phrase and you're watching this recording, we have a massive shortage. So we're running workshops that are paid for at the moment, looking at school attendance, for example, and technologies to help schools to be able to support how they can support families to attend school more regularly. We know there's a whole lot of really complex issues. There's no easy fix here. But even just using technology as a tool for collecting data to identify the scale of the issue and to be able to understand some of those problems that families are having in attending school regularly is really important. So we've funded people to come out. But a lot of schools said, hey, I would love to do this. We'd love to send people to workshops and do this. We physically cannot find enough humans with a teaching qualification to make sure that the kids are not being left behind or are getting a quality education while we leave the school. And more importantly, that everyone's safe.
Well, and it's often that more than the level of education in their subjects that they're missing. It's the legal requirement that there is a qualified, warm-blooded body in front of X number of students in each.
The legal requirement, and I guess that ethical, as teachers, that moral feeling we all feel that you want to make sure your kids are safe while you're gone for a day or 2 days. It's just a one-day workshop. And it was really hard because schools were saying, we love the fact that you're paying for it. We love the fact that you'll fund CRTs. Still, a lot of schools said we have to say no because it's an issue of our legal and an ethical duty to our students. And that really got me thinking about some of these longer term, building up the knowledge that Anam was talking around digital literacy and the digital technologies curriculum. It's a big commitment by schools right now to do that. And there's a lot of initiatives, but whether or not they reflect the realities on the ground for many schools is up in the air. I know, Gianna, you might have some ideas around that with what you do with your work, how you can support teachers to develop the knowledge they're craving without having to be out of the classroom for too much time.
Yeah, it's such a massive question because ultimately they could have the best of intentions, but if there is no time and there is such a teacher shortage, which there is. So my dad works at a school, he's an ICT manager, and it's a wonderful school. And sometimes they are struggling to find CRTs. So what happens then if they have to go to a personal development day, like you said at the University of Melbourne? What do? I think for us, and I can only speak for Happow, but we say one of the biggest things we get asked is how do you onboard teachers? Do you offer supports? Because ultimately teachers are so busy, there's such an issue of understaffing. If everything is rolled out easily for them just to plug and play, that's their biggest thing because it's a headache that they don't have to think about. They know it's ready to go for the classroom. And so where we do that. But if we didn't do that, I think there would be more concern because, of course, teachers don't have time to learn these new skills. And it makes me emotional, having this conversation, because I kind of feel like, well, what do we do? It's chicken or the egg. We need to have great teachers coming in. We need to hire more teachers. But where do these teachers come from if people are leaving the field? They're not staying long-term anymore, or whatever it might be, or they're choosing a different profession. I think
let me just put in.
Go.
Or governments sometimes decide that humanities aren't that important, so they make them more expensive to get than other degrees. And so schools haven't got those teachers, aren't there. Yeah. It's adding to the teacher shortage that you've got entire segments of curriculums that there are no teachers being trained in them at the moment because they're too expensive.
So the question is then, how do you retain staff? How do you retain quality teachers? And
how do you get them and how do you keep them?
I don't have the answer to that question.
Matthew, from the recent study that we were all very hopeful about, done by our federal education minister, where everybody was feeling really positive that something good was going to happen, turns out that it's all your fault. It's initial teacher education. That's the problem we have to fix.
Now, I said I'm going to be controversial, but I don't work in initial teacher education. I work with teachers. So I better not comment on anything my colleagues are doing. But I can talk about my general feelings about teacher training. Yeah, I can. There's some things that we know in terms of a school that we can definitely work on. Everyone can always do things better.
Always.
You know, I think back to my own initial teacher education, and there's things that that I wish that I had been taught during that initial teacher education. Having sat back and watched the process of putting together a initial teacher education course, there is so much regulation and so much oversight, and you only have a certain number of hours. Now, with the big push around numeracy and literacy, which I think every child should have the right to be able to read, every child should be able to have mathematics skills, it was really difficult for someone from my learning area, which is digital technologies, to be able to think about how do we include digital technologies. Now, you offered one solution, Carolyn, earlier about making sure we're teaching digital literacy and the digital technologies curriculum as two distinct things embedding that within every subject. That requires a lot of knowledge, that content knowledge, that pedagogical knowledge, that technological knowledge we talk about. And Anam is, I think you're pretty unique. We know that 60% of our digital technologies teachers in Victoria are teaching out of field. So just in that particular area, to try to address that oversight, we now have a foundations of digital technology subject, which is for people who are doing an English learning area and a humanities or a history learning area. It's not for people who have a digital technologies background, and it's trying to just give them enough information so when they are teaching digital technologies, they feel comfortable with some of the really core concepts and as a starting point. And then hopefully they'll catch the fire and be excited by this area and go back and do a further study that specializes in this area. But some of the best digital technologies teachers I know are PE teacher converts, they're English teacher converts, they're from all these other learning areas.
Yeah.
And they relate it back to things and concepts in their own learning area. And they see those connections and they see the value of bringing these bodies of these silos of knowledge and skills together and seeing how they can complement each other. So I am hopeful, but in terms of teacher education, look, there are some things we can change. I think we will change, particularly in digital technologies. I'd love to see every course having a focus on digital technologies in the future.
But the irony is that it is not their initial teacher education that is making our teachers leave the classroom.
There's a lot of different pressure points, we know.
And they didn't seem to find those. Their little inquiry, which was a bit disappointing. I'm not employed at the moment, so I don't have to be nice. It's just so disappointing. It's so disappointing to hear Jason and Claire come out after such hopeful and come out and say that, yeah, it was all about initial teacher education. You just wanted to weep or punch him or something of that nature.
I hope it's one part of a more comprehensive look at why we are in the situation we're in, and a more comprehensive solution that looks at how, initial teacher education is very important. We talk about this. We look at other areas as well and other stresses as well.
Yeah, what you said, I think, is, the reason we put the coaching program for out of field English teachers is to do what you're talking about doing for digital literacies, is to just get those teachers who are having to teach something they never trained in to be able to feel a bit more confident in the English classroom. And it wouldn't be possible without technology. It's not a flash technology, it's online, it's just the computer, and but without technology we couldn't do that. And I think that's what I find so hopeful globally. I think the ability to make sure that we can provide equal access to good teacher professional development, regardless of your geographic location or your socio-economic wellness or lack thereof. Technologies, in my mind, and I know I'm a bit naive, obviously you three are much more skilled at the technology stuff than I am, but I remain incredibly optimistic that it gives us the option for doing things that we could never have imagined doing 30 years ago.
I'm just as optimistic. Like absolutely, I think I could speak for all of us to say we are. I think the passion on this call is so evident because of we see what it can do and how it can benefit communities. You know, I think I am going to use the C word, COVID, so the P word, pandemic. The world has changed because of it, and I think there are certain advancements in the classroom that have taken place because there was a pressure cooker situation that occurred where you had to be able to innovate. And I think, you know, looking at from that perspective, that's been a great thing because it's forced people to learn, whether it be a teacher to learn a technology or a young person to get used to adopting that as well in the classroom in a way they hadn't previously. That's a great thing. And I think in terms of mental health, which is a massive area that I'm incredibly passionate about, the mental health of our teaching staff and the mental health of our young people are also really important, and ways that we can use technology for their mental well-being, because ultimately it's going to help them show up to the classroom, you know, every day. And like you were talking about school refusal, you know, that is the statistics show that there is more of that since the pandemic. There are more kids not wanting to go to school for a whole myriad of reasons. And so to use technology to bring them back in. I know that there is a school through Melbourne, I think it's through Melbourne City Mission, Hester Hornbrook Academy.
Yeah, there's one in South Melbourne now. Yeah,
and they're getting more and more campuses. And I remember meeting with their team and having a look at their campus out in, and I've just forgotten where it was, but it's one of the Western campus. I'm so sorry, I've forgotten where it was. And I was just gobsmacked and so elated to see the spaces that they're creating, which is allowing, even though it's for young people for that don't know, that are no longer going to a you know, your everyday school, your typical state school or whatever. I said to them, and I got emotional, actually cried when I went through this campus tour with joy, because I said, wow, if schools could adopt some of the things that you're doing here and how you're innovating, you're creating a safe space for young people to turn up and learn important skills that's going to help them in future, where they decide to go back to school or continue the rest of their learning through you and beyond. And I just think that coming back to what you said, I am optimistic. I think there are a lot of things going in the right direction. And I think if we can look at those that are doing it well, I think it's going to help the rest of us along the way.
Thank you. Now, being aware of, being respectful of your time, there is something else I'd just like to throw to you before we finish. And it tucks a bit into something that I think Gianna talked about before. I think that COVID actually was a pretty awesome thing that happened. As long as we don't allow them to put us back to where we were before. I think education technology probably, the pandemic probably accelerated that, I think, by about 10 years, the uptake of it in the classrooms. What teachers did in that first year was astounding, what they managed to pull off. But there was one part of it that bothered me, and it's still bothering me in a slightly different way. There was a sudden growth of edtech businesses at the beginning of the pandemic. And they offered schools all these wonderful things that they would be able to do for them, and get them onto their programs. They'd do all the onboarding, they'd do all this, and there was you didn't have to pay anything until the end of May. And several times I said, yeah, but what's it going to cost the school after the end of May? And I never got a response. And my worry is that there are these companies with tech skills, and I think it's happening with AI, who are not that much more educated with the technology than teachers are, but they're going away, they're going to build a program that they're going to bring in and sell to the school and convince the school to buy it and commit to it, even though it may not be the right technology for all the students. How do we guard against that? How do we protect schools and make sure that when they're offered technologies, that they know what they're getting, that they have agency, that they have open to a variety, and that they're not putting all their eggs in one basket?
I don't know, Anam and Gianna, how your vintage. I was born in 1984, and I still remember collecting the shopper dockets to get the free mice from Apple for your school. And then if you get enough dockets, you could get a Mac computer, one of the earlier Macs. And the idea that, yeah, all you have to do is get all the parents to collect their dockets and you get a free Macintosh for your school. And then you realize you need to buy all the software and you're stuck in the ecosystem for a long time. And so I think since day dot, Carolyn, tech companies, some have been really ethical. I think some have,
Yeah.
To our friends at Apple, I'm just using that example because it comes to mind, but they have been looking at how they get their foot in.
Yeah, I'm talking more about software companies coming in with a learning management system, for instance.
Yeah, and I'm not sure it's that different from the shopper docket things, about the idea of you start off with a free Mac and then saying, actually, you're going to need a printer and you're going to need this software to run it. It's probably just the internet version of that.
So how do we prepare school leaders, departments, teachers to understand what they're actually signing up for? How do we?
I can
Anam.
have a go. So, I mean, it is a real issue, and what I can talk about solutions that are sort of in progress at the moment. So, there's a collective recognition across the country that the way that we can make informed decisions about technology and empower school leadership and teachers to make informed decisions about the use and uptake of technology is through ongoing professional learning. And the key term here is ongoing. I work at the Victorian Academy of Teaching and Leadership, and our teaching excellence program, for example, requires a 10-day commitment. And the perks of that is there is research, whole body of research and testimonials that prove what that 10-day release from a school will provide to that teacher. As the technologies master teacher, that means I've got that level of continuous contact with teachers from across sectors.
Excellent.
And when I say cross sectors, it means government, Catholic and independent schools, every socioeconomic area, and they're sitting in a room with me, learning from each other, exposed to the same learning, but also learning from each other, sharing emails, building a community of ongoing practice where they can validate and compare information, pass that on to leadership and say, hey, actually, I heard from someone who's using this and it's not really working very well. Maybe we should look into this further. The other good thing is that the Department of Education is offering 50 scholarships to non-Digitech teachers from across the state to come and become trained digital technologies teachers. So PE, food tech, English, math, whatever.
Yep.
Get a course through an accredited university and become an expert at your school. Those processes are in place in recognition of what you've mentioned, Carolyn. And the last thing is that ethics in AI is a whole new topic in itself. Ethical application of artificial intelligence, which is something I remind everyone, ChatGPT, as ubiquitous as it is right now, it came onto the scene in November 2022 last year, right? And so the full ethical implications of that, we are not across yet. But increasingly, we need a body which has been put in place, and we need the right experts, not self-styled LinkedIn gurus, to come into the field and deliver and create those spaces, those accredited, recognized, and vetted spaces for teachers to come across and apply that. I believe that this is already happening. I think it's just a matter of time and patience.
Yeah, it's so important. I know Leon Furs has been writing quite a bit about the ethical parts of some of the AI. He's part of a panel with Adriano De Plato, Lauren and Michelle, who I go
Dennis, yeah.
talking about. Yeah, Michelle Dennis and Lauren Sayer. The
Sayer,
discussion is AI and the age of human, a paradox with a question mark was my topic. And they're going to be, that's what they're going to be talking about. It's a huge thing, but it's what you have all said has been really helpful, really uplifting. And, you know, if these things keep happening, all we need to do is work out how to get more people to commit to becoming teachers and staying in the profession once they're there. And it all looks very bright. I would really like to thank you all for your time this evening. Educational inequality is a huge concern of We Teach Well and of me in particular. And no matter what else we do, there will always be something that addresses inequality and in education. So I am really thankful that you all have shared your time with us freely. And if you have any, if there were any links that you have wanted to add, we can put them onto the section part about the so technical I am, the under bit, the bit that goes under the pictures on YouTube. We can.
I know exactly what you mean, so that's good.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, to have a discussion about educational equality and come out feeling so much better than you did when you started, that's got to be a good thing.
That's good, Caroline.
Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Lovely meeting you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, people, for joining us. And please have a look around. The DIF Festival has lots of information on every kind of technology you can imagine. And we will see you next year, no doubt.